Do you have the streaming utility turned on?
Yeah, it should be good to go. We tested it earlier.
Are you good with streaming?
Cool.
Okay, everyone, it's my sincere pleasure to introduce to you today Adam Hogan, who, despite what his email address is, still works for Sourcefire. Today he's going to be sharing... Is your boss going to receive that? Maybe?
I could probably, a little fired.
We could probably delete that. Today it's my pleasure to introduce to you Adam Hogan, who definitely only works at Cisco.
It's not better.
Today he's going to be modeling some of the most advanced attacks that you read about in the news. The one crisis that none of us can afford to waste, the target opportunity. I mean, disaster. Adam, I'll leave it to you.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, if you hadn't heard, Cisco acquired Sourcefire. I've been with Sourcefire for about 5 years. So we're walking that fine line as far as like, how do I introduce myself, right? Of course, I'm part of Cisco because we're all one happy family now. But I can't go around saying I sell Cisco IPS because everyone knows that sucks. So there has to be some differentiation there. So we're working that out. So it's Sourcefire, comma, now part of Cisco, right? And that's however you want to walk the line. We're still working that out. How to best to convey that information without sounding like an idiot. So, no, that's fine. It's just I got to find a way to shorten that spiel I just did down. All right. So what am I here talking about? I want to talk about how the target attack happened, at least how that malware was working. All right, and the way I'm going to do that is actually looking, analyzing that malware through a malware sandbox. Right, so I've actually got a hold of the malware, ran it through a sandbox virtual machine, which is able to run the malware, track everything it does, watch the changes, and report back on like, hey, what's this file doing? What's it trying to accomplish? So we'll take a look at how the tool works, what we're able to learn about that attack, and then I think circle back at the round, sort of talk about why, and sort of I'm hoping give you an idea of, okay, is this type of tool that could help you in your environment? So yeah, I do work for Sourcefire, and I want to mention that because what I'm using is actually a tool that we sell. And this is in no way, shape, or form supposed to be a sales pitch. I do want to mention that up front because this is the tool I have. If I had another sandbox tool, I could rewrite this entire presentation using it. That wouldn't matter. I'm not here to talk about the tool itself, but the results I got back, right? Which I hope that's clear in the presentation, but this is the first time in a long time I've given a presentation that wasn't just about open source software, so I just want to, get that out there. All right, so Target was a big bag attack, and I don't think I need to spend any time on that, right? It was costly, a lot of people are serious about it. If you're not already jumping on it to get your management interested and involved, shame on you, right? This is a great opportunity. Yeah, it cost a bunch. These are insanely conservative numbers because they're still not done, right? That was direct cost, the $200 million, just like replacing cards. CEO lost their job. That's going to a lot of turnover, a lot of change. So the monetary figure is way bigger than that. But you've heard all that. So what I'm going to talk about, let's first, what the malware actually was. Because it wasn't one piece of malware, it was actually three. There are three different parts of this attack. The first was one actually operating on the point of sale systems that was there. The next was sort of this drop spot to grab data from those point of sale systems and move it to another spot. And then finally this final exfiltration piece that would look at how to grab that data and then finally get it out to the internet, right? So it's actually that middle point that I'm looking at today. All right, so it starts with that POS system, right? So this is actually running on the cash registers in Target. And what it's doing is just basic memory scraping. This is not anything new. It's not anything advanced as much as everything wants to say it's APT. It wasn't, right? Not at least not from the perspective of like software development or attack development. This is an incredibly old attack. It's scraping memory. You swipe your card, it grabs whatever's in RAM and tries to look for whatever looks like track 1 and 2, track 2 data from a card, right? So some modern OSs are slightly better at this. Of course, this is all like XP embedded, which is sold as steady and reliable. which means you don't have to patch, which is actually not such a great thing in the long term. But that wasn't so advanced, right? There's nothing new about this part. After that, they have to get the data out, right? Because those point-of-sale terminals, cash registers, don't have access to the internet, right? Because Target went through the whole process to be PCI compliant, which means the attackers had to spend like an extra couple of hours getting this data out, right? Because they'd gone through all that process. So we have to get the data from the point-of-sale systems to a system that can talk outside of that network, right? So that's that second step. And then finally, okay, once it's outside the PCI, a very, very controlled network, now we can get it out to the internet and we're home free. So again, let's take a look at that middle part where we're going to grab the malware that's sort of collecting data from cash registers. It's making it available to systems outside of the network so it can eventually get to the internet. And what we've done is run this file through a malware sandbox, right? The idea being open up a Windows VM, put the malware on it, execute it, and then start tracking what it's doing, right? What files is it touching? Who is it talking to on the network? Is it talking to the registry? Is it changing any keys? Is it downloading other files? Is it executing other processes? Is it setting us up with a service? All these things we can track now, just like, okay, we have this very, very controlled environment, and now I can track everything this malware is doing. Let me skip past that. You get a very high-level overview, right? The idea being, okay, well, now that you've run and now that you know what this file does, can you tell me is it malware or not? And this is an issue we're going to have to come back to because it's not always clear. And this is one case where it's not clear. I mean, we had like that one red signature hit. Most of them were orange. If you were programming a system like, should I automatically block this? The answer would probably be no. This is looking suspicious at best, but I wouldn't say it at a glance automatically malicious. But if we take a look at it, we'll actually learn a lot more. And we'll come back to this idea of a threat score and whether or not we can automate this process. So what can we learn about this? Well, of course, we're going to start with some basic static analysis, right? So if you've ever taken a look at malware, if you've poked at it, if you try to figure out what's going on there, of course, it's a simple way to start, and why not roll it into these automated tools? So at a glance, we can see, okay, well, what interesting things is this file doing? We know that it's contacting an IP address, and that IP was hard-coded in there, and it's actually one of Target's IPs. All right, so they'd be able to see that right away. This is a file that they got from who knows where, and it's hard-coded to talk to an IP inside their network. We know when it was compiled, which in one given attack, maybe not that interesting, but as we start to see variants of different malware, can be very interesting as far as putting those together. Static analysis also shows what imports it's doing, right? What DLLs does this malware want to load up in order to function, right? What libraries does it need to load to work? Which can possibly tell us a lot about what it's trying to do. Of course, there's ways of hiding this. A lot of malware will try to hide what files it's going to load, what libraries it needs. There are other ways to do that, so static analysis might not capture that, but we'll be able to come back to that when we get into dynamic analysis. But we can see what functions it wants to load from the Windows library sets. So that, looking at this, we can see that it wants to, execute other processes. And in this case, nothing super suspicious, right? Excuse me. Occasionally, this will provide, a glaring clue, right? When if a lot of keyloggers, by example, are easy to identify, because if you need a low-level DLL to read from a keyboard, okay, well, why are you loading that? That looks really, really suspicious. Which not necessarily that you'll pick it up with static analysis, but we can also check what libraries are loaded dynamically as well. We can also look at what sections are in the executable file. So if you've ever picked apart MS executable file, we're looking at different file sections, how that data is stored, how is it packed in there. So we're able to check what sections are there, which first thing it's looking for is just see if this malware has been packed or encrypted in a way that's, so you see that a lot of malware authors will use tools to pack up their their malware, make it very difficult to do static analysis. You can't really read what's in there and sort of make it very, very obfuscated, the code that's going through there. So we see what sections are there, and so at a glance, there's not, it's not like UPX packed or some of the more generic packing techniques. It's also looking at the entropy of each section, which is actually a way to measure how random or not, depending on how you're looking at it, the data in that section is. So like the data section is usually about that value. It's a 1.2. If you look at human language, the entropy of like any given character in like a regular English sentence, the entropy value is about 1.2, 1.3, which means how much information is in a given character, right? If I flip a coin, it's one bit of information. If that coin's a trick coin, right? If it's weighted, if it's far more likely to come up on heads, it's not worth a bit of information. It's far more likely I'm going to get heads, so flipping a coin is not much of a surprise. So entropy is a way to measure, okay, well, how weird does this look? So really, really high entropy values will tell you right away if this code has been encrypted, right? Because it's the definition of random when you're looking at it and you can't decipher it, right? Right away it looks random. So if you have flat out encrypted file, the entropy score will actually come back at like a 7 or an 8. About 5 and 6 are where you'll see like media ciphers, like an MP3 will usually come back as a 5 or 6, right? It's a way of measuring what's going on there. This is all just based on the raw bytecode. I'd actually really like to run the entropy stats based on the assembly blocks, as we saw in the second presentation today for the gentleman from GE. I think that'd be really, really interesting. I hadn't thought of doing that before. And if I find time, that's add that to the list, right? But I want to check that out. So at a glance, we can see that the text section may have some heavy code in there. The rest of it is looking fairly normal. Just looking at the string analysis, of course, a very easy step to looking at what malware is being used out there. But we can pick up the debug path, right? So this malware was compiled with its debug code still there, right? So one, I know what directory it was compiled in, which actually let us tie it back to a lot of other variants of that malware. Just because the guy's username is in the path, right? Eradicator, I don't know how sure he pronounces it, but actually allowed to tie back to the original malware variant as far as where this code was coming from. We also picked out this move command. So we actually see it was moving a file to or from this 10.address. And it was looking for this .dll file, which is something we want to look into more, but as we get into dynamic analysis, we'll see how that comes back. So beyond that sort of, okay, we could do some string analysis, we could look at some static values, but we'll really get into some more information where we do that dynamic analysis, right? Fire the malware up, let's see what it actually does. So we know at a glance, okay, it's no files were dropped on here, it didn't actually touch the registry, the original malware. And now we can actually compare what DLLs were actually loaded to what the static analysis says. Just because if you can check those lists, now you can, it's a way to see, quick way to see, okay, is the malware author trying to hide what libraries they're actually trying to load. But we know it's going to go on and create a couple of processes. And we've actually seen it flagged as some thread delays. So this process, the malware actually sleeps. It has a sleep command embedded in it, which is fairly unusual and is enough to sort of flag as a suspicious response. So not a lot of programs will just decide to go to sleep for an arbitrary amount of time. This one will. We also have stats on memory allocation, which is, I didn't even really bother going through that much, because as we get into looking at what threads are created, it really spells out what the process was doing. All right, so we can see the process the original malware created, and what it's just doing is firing off commands to cmd.exe. It does this a few times. So we can see is it actually runs ps.exec. So it's trying to run a remote command on this internal address. and we can see how it's logging in. So it actually tells us the user credentials they had harvested from their initial campaign, right? I think news has been pretty clear that they first sent out some phishing emails to one of their HVAC vendors, and were able to pull some user credentials that way. They're actually able to see those credentials in use here, so we can see. My mouse doesn't show up here. What the TTCOP string up there, the after -u, right? That's the user name they're using to log in to those machines in order to. Or sorry, that's the machine name. They're logging in with best1_user. The password was backup user there, whatever it was. And then they're trying to kill off and restart this bladelogic.exe, which actually turned out to be another one of their malware processes. They hid it, calling it BladeLogic. There's a product by BMC called BladeLogic. Clearly, they knew Target had that software. Right, part of that initial campaign, a part of their social engineering, part of that learning about Target's environment was that they have this BMC software, which told them, one, they'd be able to get away with these usernames, because if you're running this BMC product, it creates a admin level user account, this best1_user. BMC swears that's not a default password. So apparently they had changed that at least, but still, as long as you get this one password, you now have admin access to all of the boxes in their environment that run this BMC stuff. So we know that it's just making sure that that file is getting restarted. Again, not that it's got itself into BMC software, it's just pretending to be that, right? Because the user expects that to be there. And we see the next command, so it kills it in the first one, then runs it in the second one. So it's logging into these machines, making sure that process is still running. So it knows it has its way to get from where it is now out to the internet, right? Runs off some other commands. Again, we want to make sure that's killed off, and then it sleeps for a while. It's hard to say exactly what the sleep pattern is, because the sandbox environment is going to play with time a little bit. One of the things we've seen is that malware will try and see if it's in a sandbox environment, which the simplest methods are a lot of the time just going to sleep for a while, right? Okay, let's not do anything and see if we're still caught that way, right? Now, there's actually a lot of other ways we're seeing. I mean, there's a definite game, cat and mouse, going back there as far as malware trying to detect whether it's in a sandbox. Sleeping is very, very simple. It's very widely implemented. If you round out all the different methods, though, we're seeing somewhere between like 60 and 70% of like new malware is having at least some sort of method to determine if it's in a sandbox or not. And then that command there at the bottom, we actually see it moving this file around. So this is where it's actually reaching out to a cache register, and it wants to grab, let's see, that file there under NT directory, that Twain_32a.dll. Turns out that wasn't a DLL file, it's just what they called it. If you were to go to that cache register, find that file there, the .dll file, it would be a text file full of all of the credit card numbers that cache register had pulled out of memory. All right. So it's moving that file to where this file is running. And it's going to call it data, right, underscore, and it's got a date stamped, which is based on, the clock of the virtual machine that was running. So it's logging into different point of sale systems, collecting all that information and archiving it here. So if you were to check out this system, you would find these data files all organized and date stamped as far as where they came from, and every single one of them will be full of credit card numbers and the names and other data they're able to pull off of there. They didn't even try to hide it that much. I dug through the dynamic analysis to track down, okay, here's the process that's running and everything, which was more work than I had to do because you can see it right here. Those are the commands we just looked at. When they fire off cmd.exe, they don't even bother trying to hide the window from the user. It pops right up here. Right? Of course, when we see something change on the desktop, it snaps a picture of it, and we can take a look at that. All right, so there's the commands it's running. Again, which also tells us a little something about the malware author, that either they're not that sophisticated or they're not trying that hard, right? I don't want to say that guy's stupid, it just might. Laziness is often rational, right? So if you don't have to work that hard, why bother, right? This attack was successful. So
It didn't matter that he didn't get caught. I mean, it wasn't somebody said, hey, this thing's popping up, let's look into that, and that's what triggered it. It was the bank's fault.
Yeah, so I was tempted to say like, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, but I don't know if that's true. He may have made a perfectly rational decision, like, why would I put any more work into this? This is going to work.
This would probably be running on a server somewhere, right? It's not. So it's set up
Right.
in a dark room, probably where nobody's computer anyway.
Right. All right, let's see. Then we also started to observe network behavior. We saw it reaching out to this target IP address, and it is looking for an FTP server. So this malware is reaching out saying, hey, I'm looking for this IP address, I'm looking for an FTP server. So a good sandbox can say, I'm that FTP server, you know, like a liar. And we can do some, you know, basic like honeypot techniques there, right? So, hey, yeah, I'm totally that FTP file. And in fact, I mean, this is just the text I dumped out of it. But if we look at, let me get out of there. So this is just the PCAP it grabbed. So we can actually take a look and say, okay, yeah, there's their FTP. Or if I just want to pull it up, and there's a TCP stream, which shows us not only is it connecting via FTP, but how. Because there is the username and password it's using to get into that system. So if you had this information, you're on Target's network, you could literally type in this command. You could FTP over the server, you could log in with the hacker's username and password, and there would be a giant pile of credit card numbers, right? So you can check that out. This data was also apparently useful in tracking down like who this was tied back to. Digital W apparently was a name used enough they tied back to someone, as well as the password. Crisis 1089, I don't remember the explanation. It has something to do with the revolution in Ukraine. A revolution in Ukraine, I can't keep them straight, to be fair. We had something to do with that. So there's the actual hard-coded credentials they're using in that final exfiltration point. So this server here, this FTP server is the final spot where they're collecting all of the credit card numbers. From there, they're going to log in from the internet, and then it's out, right? And then it's just dispersed into the wild. It's never coming back, right? It's gone at that point. Like peeing in a pool. It's just in there. You can't get out. It's in the internet now. So we will collect all that data on what they're doing. All right, now let's pull that back. All right, and I showed you that live. Let's see. How am I doing time? We had a couple other things we're able to pull off of there. Like they had also loaded a network scanner onto their system, onto the server they were using. So we could actually pick that up. It was very easy to identify what it was doing, much more so than the malware we just looked at. Because this one got flagged as, I mean, it was packed, or this file was encrypted. And in fact, if you start looking at the sections, it was UPX packed. So we say, okay, well, whatever they're doing is trying to hide it. We could see that it was written in Russian. There's Russian language at least embedded in this program. Not that the code was Russian, right? I don't know if that's an important part of malware analysis, but an important part of every security professional job is making your boss crap their pants occasionally. And being able to say Russia or China just goes a long way. I'm not saying that's right, but it works. Why not use it, right? So we're able to pull that information out and say, okay, yeah, this is encrypted. We know it's acting on the network. It's loading up all these libraries. We're checking to see if it's online. And it's reaching out, and the first thing it does is it reaches out to, what's my IP address, and wants to figure out where it is, right? Which is actually very common behavior for bots as well. Bots want to be able to report back to the botnet where in the world they are. So one of the first things you'll typically see on like a botnet infection is they'll go out to some like geolocation IP, figure out what the IP is, figure out where in the world they are. They'll ping a geolocation service. Because a good botnet will provide a nice little map of the world where all your bats are, because they have fancy dashboards just like security vendors do, right? Dell Secureware had a great paper out about the malware they had found and everything, but a part of that research was actually a list of hashes that they had not identified. Right, so I grabbed those hashes, pulled it into our system, and said, okay, well, has anyone ever seen this hash before? Can I get this file? Was able to grab the file, so I ran that through the sandbox, and we could see at a glance that's looking a little suspicious. It's definitely idle. So we have those flags, like, hey, this might be trying to figure out if it's in a VM environment, if it's in a sandbox, and it might be packed or encrypted. As we dug into that, just static analysis actually was able to pull out the copyright information. And this is actually a Microsoft tool that had gone unidentified on that system. So this was a tool for, BCP. So it uses just bulk copying data from MS SQL servers, right? I'm not entirely sure if this was used as part of the attack, but this was part of the attacker's toolkit. It was one of the files he loaded up on the server once they had gotten into target. Another unknown file. Again, this was just like hashes listed in Dell stuff that I pulled. And what was this one? Oh, so this one looked, again, a little suspicious. Again, not very clear, but it was doing some kernel mode functions, which is a little unusual. But again, the static analysis was enough that I'll just pull that out and Google it. Right? What is Somarsoft? Because those were embedded in there as the copyright. And find out it's actually for, what was it? Security auditing tool, which actually dumps out the audit settings and permissions for Windows servers. All right, so this, again, just part of the toolkit the attacker had put together. All right, so what good is this information? Right? We've been able to take a look at this malware and see, okay, this is how it's operating. We know where in the network it's talking to. We know where these files are coming from and going to. All right, so we've gotten a bit of behavior of this file. Was it enough to identify it clearly as malware, right? That's kind of a maybe. Right, it wasn't like insanely obvious, like key loggers usually are, things like that. So this is going to require some set of human eyes to actually take a look at this and say, okay, well, what's going on with this file? But it also gives us a lot of indicators of compromise. If we have all this data now, we can go back and say, okay, this is what we can do with it. We know what IPs it's talking to. Well, let's pull its logs. Let's see who else is talking to it. We know what commands it was running. Well, who else is running those commands? We know it's using FTP. Well, is there supposed to be an FTP server on there? Can we look at our security logs and see how long the FTP server's been going? Where else we can see it from? Right, so there's breadcrumbs along the way as far as what else can we follow up on. Because of course, while this was a very specific and focused attack, the question is always, well, where else is it, right? Is this the only copy of this malware running? Is this the only instance? Where else in my environment can we find it? So we want to pick out those pieces of behavior that we can find on other systems, right? We know it was looking, for what the generic name scheme was for the data it was filing. Well, maybe we want to check out our other host to see, does anyone else have those files? So there are a lot of things going on there. But the biggest thing is that it's really easy to use, right? I'm reading a report of what this malware did. It's listing out for me, what files does it modify, what processes is it spawning off. I didn't have to load up IDA. I didn't have to map out any stack. I didn't have to remember any assembly, okay? Which is, I think, a huge benefit. There's a steep learning curve there. A while back, I did a lot of this stuff, right? I'd reverse engineer malware. I'd get in, try and disassemble it, right? Try and map out the stack, try and figure out what it's doing, the long way. But it's been a few years, all right? It's 3 years since I've really done that, and that is a skill that will atrophy quickly, all right? I don't know if I could, there's no way I could jump back into doing that. No way at all. All right, so this lecture let me figure out a lot about what this malware is doing without needing fairly difficult skills, right? Now, there are flaws to it, certainly, and we'll come back to that. But All right. Should it be set and forget? I guess the automatic question then is going to be, okay, well, can a tool like this start, automatically blocking stuff? And of course, the question is, the answer is maybe. It's always maybe. Should it be something that we can automate and just walk away from, right? And I'd like to move then into sort of discussing security tools in general. Like, how should we be using them, right? Is this a tool I can use? Is this going to work for me? And so I'll take a step back to do a quick definition, because my graduate degree is in economics, so deal with it. This is the way I think. So what we're doing from is, like, productivity comes from, right, labor supplemented with capital. That's the general idea, right? So one point I'm trying to make, frankly, to anyone who's having like a very generic discussion about information security, is that the tool is there to make somebody's job easier. It's generally not there to replace someone's job, right? There are very few tasks in information security we can automate completely. There are some, certainly, but then the question becomes, okay, what can we automate completely, and what determines that, right? So how much of it's going to be labor? How much of it's going to be a tool, or capital, to use the economic phrase? Cost is typically primary factor, and we've seen this in the news fairly recently, right? We had widespread protests saying, hey, we need $15 an hour minimum wage. And shortly thereafter, consoles like this one showing up in fast food restaurants being like, oh, just step up here, here's a touchscreen to order your food, right? If cost of labor is going to go up, then we're likely to see more capital substitution, right? Which is a way of saying that if people are expensive, then we're going to rely more on tools, which I think is incredibly relevant to information security, because we keep seeing these reports, right, from the Bureau of Labor Stats. Hey, unemployment in information security is obscenely low, right? It came back, what, 0% for, was it 3 or 5 quarters in a row or something like that? That never happened before, right? They hadn't measured that. And actually, it really verifies their inability to measure it, because likely the actual unemployment rate is negative, right? Because they're not at all measuring pent-up demand, right? If there was, if it's 0% unemployment, that doesn't capture if it's actually, say, -10, which means, like, if there were more good people to hire, I would, right? Which I think is a problem a lot of people are having. So as we see a shortage in people, we should actually see, well, first of all, good news, a rise in wages, right? But with that, it may be tempting to automate more of our jobs, right? So when does that work and when doesn't it? Whether or not we can automate, I'm trying to boil it down to, okay, well, how do you capture that? What jobs can be automated, what can't? What can be supplemented with a tool, what can't? I think it comes down to, like, complexity and creativity. At least these are the sort of spectrums I can pick out to sort of measure this on, right? So you have the Model T assembly line, simple job. We can automate a lot of that, right? But it'd be far more difficult to automate open heart surgery, right? That's a far more complex task. That's something that actually requires a human's knowledge and ability to do, right? And then, of course, if there's a creative element, even more so, right? We can't have robots and computers painting happy trees, right? Well, new happy trees. They can make copies of those. But if we want new ones, of course, can't do that, right? So, how much of security can be automated? All right, can we get to the point where it's just like, oh, you just plug this device in and it does everything for you? All right, and I think we all know the answer is no, right? But I don't think we're very good at explaining that to our bosses and to management, right? Because a lot of people have a very old idea what security is. If your best idea of what security is a firewall, you may well have a good idea that you can automate a lot of this stuff, right? Because there's not a lot of creativity or complexity going in TCP IP, right? This is what a packet should look like. This is where the IP is. This is where the port is. I'm going to do checks based on that. That's fairly simple. That's easy to automate. A firewall is very much, okay, you can set it here and largely forget about it, right? Policy changes, of course, even then, we need people to run the firewalls. But as we get into more complex space, that's going to be even less so, right? So point I want to come off is at least to get away from, I want to start with something technical and get around to, okay, I guess here's a lesson we can walk away with. But there's no silver bullet, right? And any vendor who tells you, I can detect everything, I can block all the things, is just lying to you. Throw them out on their ass, right? It's not possible. And on the, if on the off chance someone made a huge technical revelation, said I can detect all the malware, even if that were true, it would only be true for a short period of time, right? The people writing malware would find a new way to do it to get around it. There is an arms race, a literal arms race. I mean, I start by like, oh, this is a good metaphor. It's like, well, it's kind of not. That's not a metaphor. That's constantly going on back and forth, right? So if you want to understand where malware is going, you can read Alice in Wonderland or study parasitology. There's a part in Alice in Wonderland where the Red Queen here is explaining to Alice that, oh, in order to stay in the same place, we have to run really, really fast, right? Well, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you're not on mushrooms, but the idea is there's this part of Wonderland where you literally have to run and run and run in order to stay in the same place, otherwise you're falling behind, and it's the same in security, right? I stole the metaphor from parasitology because it's something they've been using to explain the co-evolution of parasites and their hosts, right? The idea being if you've got parasites in you, you'll try and find a better way to get them out or protect yourselves from them, and they'll find ways to reinfect you, right? And as soon as you define, if you get a better immune system, as long as you get a better way of getting the stuff out of you, they will evolve again, right? So there's this constantly going on. So even to stay in the same place, right, as far as like I want to stay healthy, right? If a species wants to stay healthy, they have to be evolving at least as fast as the parasites are in order not to be overtaken by them, right? And it's the same in security. Malware is being written to get around security products, right? The bad guys have security products. They have all the antivirus, they have intrusion detection, they have all that running in their labs, right? We actually have a lot of evidence on this. They're checking this stuff. And we know if we come out with a better way of detecting stuff, they will come out with a better way of getting around it, right? So that is inherently a creative process. It makes security a creative process because if for no other than the reason, the bad guy has to be creative. So we have to be in response, right? So I would say that means we cannot fully automate security. Okay, so I want to put the bug out there because I think, for one, I think it'll help you explain to your managers, okay, well, what tools do we need and why, right? And by the way, what people do we need and why? Because honestly, there's a lot of mixed priorities in people. I see a lot of people rushing out to get tools that they will never ever have the manpower to use, right? Because I don't know, because compliance needs it, you just got to check the box or whatever. But in a lot of cases, they'd be far better off investing in smart people. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these new security tools, and I think sandboxing and the cool stuff I was trying to show off today is one of those that, yeah, there's some automation we can get out of it, and there's definitely going to be some malware it will know to block right away, but there's going to be a lot in the middle. And that means it's not fully automated. That means it's a tool. And that means a tool is used. A tool is used by a human being, right? So the bulk of these tools are there to make your jobs easier, or at least make you better at them, right? So if you're just looking at tools, you're probably screwing up. You need smart people first, right? Also, very, very good justification. If you can get this through your manager's head, great justification to keep money coming for training, right? I mentioned before, like, I don't remember assembly anymore. I used to do that kind of stuff. It's gone, right? And it's like that with security stuff. If you're not doing this, you're losing it, right? So it's one thing I'll tell managers is like, okay, well, a huge bulk of your job, like if you're managing like security analysts and things, a huge bulk of your job is to keep your people the hell out of meetings. Because if they're spending all days in meetings, they're just forgetting things. It's just leaking out of their brains, right? So give them some space to learn some stuff and make sure they're doing these things, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about what tools you have, it's about what your people can do with them. All right, so I'd say it's not just about replacing people, but supplementing them, making their job easier. Okay. That is the end of my slides. So let me open up for questions. How much time do we have? I have a fair bit of time. The questions on the sandbox, or I don't know, whatever else you got. Your hand was up first.
Okay, so one of the big questions that you asked was, whether or not this was malicious based on some of the observables that you saw, going back obviously to the first part of your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
There were several things that kind of popped out to me that said, that could be malicious. Things like virtual alloc, creating new processes, things that could potentially indicate process injection, that kind of thing. What really stuck out to me is yes, there are legitimate uses for those, combination of APIs, et cetera, imports, et cetera. But are you really going to see that on a point of sale machine? Are you really going to see that where it's at and where you find that? So do you take, that kind of context into consideration when you decide, hey, is this malware?
Yeah, I mean, if you can, right? If you have that contextual information, but the question is often like, okay, if you're doing this kind of sandbox analysis, where is the malware coming from? Where are you picking it up? And I mean, in my case, I got it secondhand, right? So the question would be like, if you're going to have that contextual information, are you going to pick that malware up from the PCI network, or are you grabbing it like in transit? On its way out, or traversing the network as they copy it in or out. So it's often a question of where are you actually picking it up.
And then that context becomes really important. And if you can place that context into your analysis, making that determination, I think, becomes a little bit easier.
Yes, definitely, right? So it comes, again, like how you're going to use the tool. Because a lot of people, if they're doing sandbox stuff, they'll look at, maybe you pull it from the endpoints, maybe you pull it from the network, but a lot of people pulling malware samples from the network are really only looking at the perimeter. And they're losing that contextual information.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So no, very good point. That is very valuable information and stuff that absolutely can't be automated because it's relevant to your environment, right? If you have it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You had your hand up.
Yeah, my question's fairly simple. The reports you were showing on the screen, is that coming from the Sourcefire AMP product, or is that something else?
Can you ask me that later?
Yes.
I'd like to stay neutral. The data I showing could have come from any number of sandbox. It could have come from Cuckoo, which you can download for free, other vendors, right? And I don't want to do that. This is. I usually just speak about open source software. I've been a snort guy for a long time. I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch. Like that's what I'm doing, right? I'm happy to answer that like after this, but I don't want to go into that now. Yeah.
Did you do any analysis on the point of sale side? And if so, does the 100 million the Target is spending to get chip and pin card readers, is that going to protect them from this same attack?
Yeah, because you wouldn't have both pieces of information in the same place, right? The idea being that if you're swiping a card and all you have to do is sign for it, all the information you need is in that swipe, right? So all you need to do is scrape the memory and you have it all, right? If there's one good thing that comes out of Target getting hacked, it'll be the death of swipe and sign in the US, which the rest of the world has gone away from, right? Yeah, so that's yeah, that's a really good question, right? Because whenever someone says, "Would this have stopped the attack?" It's like, okay, well, this one particular file, yeah, maybe. But if chip and pin had been in place, the attacker might have done something different. So it's actually a really hard question to answer, right? Would this have stopped the attack? This one attack, yeah, okay. But we're talking about attackers. We're talking about creative people who are willing to put in a little bit of extra time to get this malware in here. Which, by the way, is what made this APT or whatever, right? It's not the vulnerability. It's that they were willing to put in a bit of time to learn about Target's environment, right? And what kind of software they're running, what the server naming schemes were, and how to get in there. It was, I mean, the attack itself wasn't new at all. 5 minutes? All right. Other questions? All right, great. Oh, one other.
So you were talking kind of about like the economy of there's the arms race, and it's really sort of an economic battle.
Yeah.
So is there a way that, you know, I mean, is the like way forward for this, you know, is it possible to make it, you know, not quite so profitable? And like from the business, you know, on the business end, is there a way that you could restructure the way that, you know, the way credit card systems work, or something to make it not worth the effort?
Oh gosh. If I knew the answer to that, I would have sold it and I'd be insanely rich, right?
Like to keep people from stealing copper out of houses, you just don't use copper anymore, right? Everybody uses shitty PVC plumbing now.
Right.
You don't have to worry about your abandoned house getting looted for copper.
Sure, and that's very much like a price maneuver, right? It's not like everyone decided, hey, PVC is better, but it's cheaper, and how are we going to build houses? They're going to get insanely expensive or broken into, right? The question becomes, can we make it more expensive to hack?
Well, you know, like part of the reason that people are willing to invest as much as they are is, you know, they come from criminal backgrounds, and it's way easier to snatch credit card numbers off the internet than it is to stick a gun in someone's face.
Right.
Way less dangerous.
Yeah.
That's the
Turn off the internet?
the value proposition for a criminal is this is actually an increase in, you know, safety and profitability and stuff like that. Is there something businesses can do in response to degrade that value proposition for the opposition?
No.
That's pretty much.
I mean, like any single business, no. Could a credit card company come up with a way and be like, hey, the way we do it is better, we can respond faster? They might, and that'd be great. If there's enough incentive, maybe you would all switch to a different credit card company because they offer better security, right? That could potentially happen. But if you're talking about like any given retailer, what could they do? I don't see anything they could do to make it less profitable to hack them, unless they figure out how to track hackers and invest in some ICBMs and raise the cost of getting caught, right? Otherwise, I'm not sure how they could do that, yeah. All right, any other questions? Well then, thanks everyone who put BSides together today. It's actually a great honor to come here and speak. This is something I've been looking forward to, demonstrably so actually. This is the first time since I was 17 I missed the Motor City Comic Con, which is going on this weekend. So I ditched those nerds to be here with you nerds, and I haven't regretted it, right, yet. So, thank you all for listening to me.